Hello and welcome to this tutorial video, which is all about using theory to inform the way that you design your curriculum and your lesson plans. Now, what will we cover in this tutorial? Well, what we're going to do is look at how theories can influence the design of your schemes of work and how it can influence and should influence your lesson planning. Four that we're going to look at is the VAK learning styles, which stands for Visual, Auditory and Kinesthetic Learning Styles. We're going to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're going to look at Bloom's taxonomy and also NPL, which is an acronym for NeuroLinguistic Programming. Now, they are going to start off quite simple, and by the end of it, some of the theories do get quite complicated. But just remember, this tutorial video is an introduction to these topics. It's your responsibility to go off and do additional research if you need to, in order to make sure that your responses are at the appropriate level. Now, VAK learning styles. As I mentioned before, it's visual, auditory and kinesthetic. Now, you might be familiar with this already, but if you're not, visual learners tend to and prefer to learn by watching something, reading something, doing something involving visually. So it's important that when there are visual learners in the classroom that you do cater for this. For example, this presentation does contain visual information as well as auditory information via my spoken word. Useful to have a combination of all three learning styles, because every individual is a combination of all three, but obviously some of which will be more geared to a certain style than another. Now, the kinesthetic approach is those that are doers. So if you're one of these people that when you buy a new piece of technology just get stuck in, don't bother reading the instructions, just have a play around, experiment, you're more likely to be a kinesthetic learner. Now, what I'm not going to do is show you how you can find this information out. You can find a variety of free VAK learning tests that you can actually give to your learners so that you can gauge a better understanding of the types of learning styles you'll have in your classroom. And also you'll be able to find quite a lot of additional theory about how this can be implemented. How should this impact your lesson plans and your schemes of work? Well, it's quite simple really. You need to cater all three. You need to work out and devise training resources that will hit all three. How you do that will vary depending on your subject. So just to reiterate, we all learn in different ways. We've got to find that out. Everybody will contain elements of each learning style. So again, you will have strengths and you will have weaknesses. So do not forget or single out any one style, because everybody will need a combination of all three. Now, next one, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay. What Maslow's hierarchy of needs does is it kind of explains why some of our learners may not be able to reach the higher levels of cognitive thinking skills that we're after. It does explain some psychological states that we as human beings must reach before learning can take place. Now, this is the hierarchy itself. Now, the physiological need is our most primitive needs as human beings. So the need for food, the need for water, the need for shelter, warmth and opportunity to use the toilet, etc. If your learners are cold, are not had a break, that sort of thing, then it's unlikely that they're going to be able to work their way up, because their primary goal is to deal with that physiological need. Okay? The next one is to feel safe. Now, this doesn't just have to be physically safe, so secure, freedom of fear, hazards, that sort of thing. It's also emotionally safe as well. If learners feel that there are bullies or people that are just too big for their boots, chipping away at people and making fun, then they're not going to feel emotionally safe, and they're going to feel that, well, actually, I'm not willing to take a chance and answer this question in fear for looking like a fool. So it's really important that your behaviour management is fit for purpose and deals with that so that people feel safe. Moving up is the need for friendship, peer support, that sort of thing. So learners don't want to work in isolation necessarily, so you need to have an opportunity for that to happen. For example, if you state that students must work in silence in your classroom, well, you know, that may not be brilliant for some people. They may want to share ideas, build emotional relationships, that sort of thing. You need to be aware of that and offer opportunities of peer work, group work, that sort of thing. Okay, so the next level up is the self-esteem. This is a tier where learners start to feel confident with what they can do, that they can achieve what they need to achieve, and that they are respecting others and being respected by others. So this is about feeling accepted within a group and feeling that they're able to do the work. How does this link in with you as a teacher? Well, you need to make sure that what you're asking of your learners is doable for a start, and you give them the resources to get there. If you set something far too hard in a large task without breaking it down into manageable chunks, then people aren't going to feel that they're able to do it. And the final tier in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the self-actualization stage. And here, this is all about learners feeling creative, having the ability to solve problems and solving them well, accepting of facts, that they can look through any prejudice and deal with that. You know, really high-end skills. And from in the education point of view, what we're looking from our learners is those two stages. So it's really important not to forget the other three, because without that, learners aren't necessarily going to be able to make their way up the hierarchy. Okay, next theory. Bloom's taxonomy basically is used to help plan for learning objectives, to help plan your chunks, to make sure that what you're setting the learners is at the appropriate level. And it's used to really help engage the higher thinking skills that we're looking for from our students. Before that, though, we need to understand the difference between a learning objective and a learning outcome. Now, it's always good practice that you share your learning objectives and learning outcomes with your learners as soon as possible, so that they get a good idea what it is that you're expecting of them, and they've got an idea of what it is that they're expected to be doing. So the learning objective makes people aware, and it should also be progressive, so not just standalone learning objectives, that the learner can see an overall learner journey as a consequence from a series of lessons. Now, the learning outcome is what it is they will be able to do by the end of this session. What will they be producing? What will they be able to do? It's also linked in with success criteria, which you'll probably learn later on in the future tutorials. But essentially, a success criteria is a recipe that the learner needs to do or needs to have for them to be successful in that lesson. So you're literally spelling it out. So there are a few models that you can use to help create learning objectives and learning outcomes. You will come across these quite frequently on various online resources like the tests, that sort of thing. WALT is just an acronym for We Are Learning Too. So if you're really struggling to formulate an appropriate learning objective, if you use that starter sentence, your learning objective should follow quite nicely. Wilf, again, what I'm looking for helps you to build those learning outcomes. So again, if you're struggling to find out exactly or dictate exactly what the learner should be doing, you can use that starter sentence to help you. So as you become more proficient and more familiar with creating learning objectives and learning outcomes, you'll probably like to combine the two, learning objective and outcome, within the same sentence. Let me give you some examples. Now, green is a lob, so learning objective. The yellow is a learning outcome. So for today, we are learning to construct a learning objective. Nice and basic, that one. Now, the outcome, we are looking for you to produce suitable learning objectives in your schemes of work and lesson plans. That is exactly stating what it is that you need to have at the end. Now, the next one, to construct appropriate learning objectives within your schemes of work and lesson plans. So the learning outcome is that you will have a learning objective, an appropriate learning objective within your scheme of work, and the objective is to be able to construct them. Okay, so Bloom's taxonomy is all about choosing the right verbs and the right language to hit the various levels of academic competency. So the easiest is the knowledge, okay, through to the evaluation, which is a much more challenging task, because a learner can't evaluate something unless they understand it thoroughly. This is the hierarchy here. You'll come across varieties of this, but this kind of helps you to formulate the right words. I would recommend that you have one of these printed out just so that you can reflect on it as you're planning your lesson. But if we start right at the basic one here, knowledge, we have got a variety of verbs that you can use within your learning objective to hit this outcome. And this is how the students may be able to evidence this. So this is partly to do with their learning outcome. Moving through to evaluation, the most commonly, I will probably estimate, is likely to be the comprehension phase. To explain, to relate, to describe, to match, all those sorts of things. These are the most commonly used learning objective. And again, the outcomes, these are the artifacts in which the learners can produce. This is obviously a very short list. You will come across a variety of others, but it's important that we have a variety of challenge. So if you've got a 10-lesson scheme of work that you know that the learners have got to be able to conduct, you're going to start off with the knowledge, obviously, and then they're actually going to probably advance through to these levels, these stages, as time goes on towards the latter end of the syllabus or subject. Now, the next one, NeuroLinguistic Programming. Basically, this is how we connect between internal experiences, so this is a neuro bit, the brain bit, the language, linguistic, and the behaviours. Now, NeuroLinguistic Programming is a two-way, it's a dynamic process in which we understand and learn something. It's two-way, so it's not just teacher-led. It's the teacher's responsibility to look at the body language of the learners, and from there you'll be able to see if they actually understand what you're talking about. And if that is the case, then the teacher would then adapt their practice if they've not got it, or adapt the words that they're using, maybe re-explain it, maybe completely scrap the lesson altogether and start at a different point. So this is how the neuro-linguistic programming can affect you during your actual practice. Continuing with that, to comply with neuro-linguistic programming, learners must be at a state of curiosity rather than a state of boredom. It's not good. If a learner's not interested or engaged, then how are we expected for them to repeat a process? Lots of people learn by repeating things. I mean, we would all have been through primary school where we repeated the times tables until we remembered them inside and out. That is one strategy. But if it's something that's extremely boring, it's not going to happen very easily. Whereas if you took those timetables and converted them in some sort of song or rhyme, hang on a minute, you've just changed it all of a sudden. You've now created something that's a bit more fun and making it easier for the learners to remember. Therefore, they're more likely to take on board what it is that you're teaching. So you need to find out what motivates your learners. So as I just mentioned, learning occurs through repetition, through curiosity, and that self-actualization stage within Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right, another important about neuro-linguistic programming is people can get attached to whether learning was fun or useful or not. If you constantly went through something that was really dull and boring, you as a human being will instantly put up the shutters and switch off if that happens again. But it's really important to know that this belief that's learnt can also be changed. So if for whatever reason you find a lesson, learners just switched off, you could attempt it in a slightly different way, and all of a sudden that topic that they thought was boring can be reignited again. But it's really important to know that it can all be changed if it doesn't quite go right first time. A teacher can change their delivery, can change the way that they're communicating, use different language, More importantly as well is the non-verbal. Is that teacher passionate about the subject that they're delivering? Because usually that passion can be passed on to learners, whereas if it's a dull, monotone kind of delivery where you can obviously see the teacher just wants to get home at 4 o'clock, well, that is going to pass on to the learners. So all of these types of things you can lead as a practitioner. So all your communication potentially influences the learning. So it's very important that you plan how you want to be perceived in that given context. As I just mentioned earlier, it might require a little rhyme or a poem to help learn it. It might require a more serious approach to a topic that's really quite horrifying, for example, or it may require a bit of passion, enthusiasm to portray it in a positive light. So again, teaching is all about creating those states that are conducive to learning, and it's our job to cater for that in every lesson as much as is physically possible. Okay, so how does NeuroLinguistic programming affect my planning? Well, I'm not going to tell you directly. Well, I kind of have a little bit in this video, but I want you to think about how your resources can affect the way people learn and remember and take on board what it is that you're delivering. How can your language affect boredom? How can affect the way you're perceived and your subject matter? Think about the way that you come across as a person. How can you tell if learners are actually getting what you're talking about? And how can you set out those realistic expectations? You also need to think about your subject knowledge. You do need to be several steps ahead of your learners, and you do need to be, or perceived to be, an expert in your field so that you can accurately and confidently respond to any questions. So that pretty much concludes this tutorial. Thank you very much for listening, and I do hope that you found some of these principles interesting and hopefully provoke some future research by yourselves. Thank you.